Today, we are going to look at the most disturbing deaths caused by pranks, from an innocent teenage joke that caused a life to be taken, to a prank of betrayal that ended in a heartbreaking scene in front of a lover. Let's dive straight in. It was June 22nd, 2016, in a quiet residential area on the outskirts of Chiang Mai, Thailand. Night had settled in, and the neighborhood was calm, broken only by insects and distant traffic. An active rail line ran behind the homes, ungated, familiar, and often ignored by residents. Narin Chayasit had just turned 24. He worked as a junior drafting assistant for a small construction firm in central Thailand, and still lived with his parents a few streets from his childhood home. Co-workers described him as reliable and quiet, someone who showed up early and left on time. Friends said he didn't enjoy pranks and usually avoided surprises, but he trusted the people closest to him. When his birthday came up, he tried to downplay it. The group decided to celebrate anyway. According to later police interviews, the plan was meant to feel dramatic but harmless. A few friends suggested a surprise party at a nearby house. Before revealing it, they wanted to scare him briefly, something they thought would make the reveal more memorable. The idea was to blindfold Nareen, bring him near the railway line at the edge of their neighborhood, let him hear a train approaching, then remove the blindfold and explain the joke. Several friends said they had crossed that section of track many times and believed trains followed a predictable schedule. One friend set a phone on a concrete ledge beside the tracks to record the moment. Another held a phone from the side. Witnesses later said Narin was told they were stopping briefly on the way to dinner. When they reached the rail corridor, someone tied a cloth over his eyes. He laughed and asked where they were. One friend told him to relax and just stand still. They guided him forward. According to the video reviewed later, his feet were positioned between the rails. The blindfold stayed in place. Nareen asked again what was happening. A friend standing behind him said it would make sense in a second. At first, the area was quiet. Then a distant train horn sounded, low and muffled. Several friends later said they felt a vibration underfoot and assumed they still had time. As the seconds passed, the horn sounded again, louder and closer. One witness later said that was the moment he realized the train was much nearer than they expected. On the phone recording, a single headlight appeared around the curve, cutting through the trees along the track. At that point, Narin pulled his blindfold away and saw the train. According to witness statements, he froze immediately. His shoulders tensed, and his arms stiffened at his sides. He did not step back or turn away. The recording captured someone urging him to move, assuming he would react once he understood what was happening. Instead, he stood in place, eyes fixed down the track. One friend later told police he thought Nareen was still processing the scare, until the horn became continuous and the vibration underfoot intensified. Another reached out toward him, calling his name, but stopped when the train entered full view at speed, leaving no time to intervene. The train engineer later reported seeing a figure on the tracks and immediately sounding the horn while applying emergency brakes. Railway data showed the train was traveling about 35 miles per hour. The distance was too short. The impact occurred seconds later. Narin was struck and thrown clear of the tracks. The fixed phone jolted and tipped. The handheld camera dropped, capturing gravel, shoes moving frantically, and shouting. Neighbors nearby heard the horn and ran toward the crossing. Friends yelled for someone to call emergency services. The train came to a stop several hundred feet down the line. Responders arrived within minutes, but Narin's injuries were severe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as multiple traumatic injuries consistent with a train collision. There were no signs of alcohol or drugs. The report noted no defensive injuries or evidence of attempted escape, consistent with a freeze response under extreme fear. Police reviewed both phone recordings in full and interviewed each friend separately. Several admitted they assumed Nareen would move on his own. Charges were filed for reckless endangerment, resulting in death against two individuals involved in positioning him on the tracks. Both later received suspended sentences, citing negligence rather than intent. The birthday decorations stayed in their boxes. In the months that followed, the informal crossing was fenced and warning signs were installed. Railway officials later referenced the case in safety briefings, emphasizing that trains cannot stop quickly and that moments of hesitation near active tracks can be fatal. It was November 18, 2016, in Akron, Ohio, during the final hour of a slow afternoon shift at a small office supply warehouse. Orders had tapered off, supervisors were distracted with paperwork, and employees were passing time between cleanup tasks, an environment where attention slipped and jokes began to replace routine. Among the staff was Eric Dalton, 32 years old. He worked as an inventory clerk, responsible for checking incoming boxes, updating stock sheets, and labeling outgoing orders. Eric had been with the company for just under a year. He was known as reliable, quiet, and methodical, someone who followed procedures and rarely joined in on office humor. He usually carried a pen clipped to his shirt pocket and a small clipboard for counts, even when moving between aisles. The warehouse was a plain setup: concrete floors, metal shelving, rolling carts, and tight aisles between pallets. Safety rules focused on equipment, not behavior, and small pranks were common and largely ignored. Earlier that week, coworkers joked about Eric's habit of walking fast while reading inventory sheets. During a shift lull, two of them tied his shoelaces together while he was bent over, planning to undo them as soon as he noticed. Eric finished his count and straightened up, clipboard under one arm, pen still clipped near his chest. He took a step forward. CCTV footage from the aisle showed what happened next in real time. His feet caught instantly. With his shoes bound, his stride collapsed into a short, uncontrolled stumble. His upper body pitched forward. He did not have time to put his hands out. As he fell, the clipboard slipped free. His right shoulder struck first, twisting his body sideways. The pen, clipped high on his shirt near the collar and angled upward, was forced inward as his head pitched forward. The tip entered his left eye at an angle, penetrating the socket. His head struck the concrete floor a fraction of a second later. The impact was audible on the recording. The footage showed Eric's body come to rest face down, legs entangled, one arm trapped beneath him. He did not move afterward. Nearby activity in the aisle ceased, and the recording captured coworkers entering the frame and then stepping back. Emergency services were contacted shortly after. Paramedics arrived approximately 6 minutes later and were guided straight to the aisle. They rolled Eric onto his side and assessed him on the floor. Blood was visible around his face, and the pen was lodged deeply. He showed no response. Responders initiated life-saving measures, but the injury was catastrophic. Eric was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death a penetrating head injury. The pen entered through the left eye, causing immediate and catastrophic brain damage. The fall itself was contributory, but not fatal. Investigators reviewed CCTV footage and concluded that the tied shoelaces directly caused the loss of balance and fall. 2 coworkers were formally charged with involuntary manslaughter and later accepted plea agreements resulting in suspended sentences and probation. Following the incident, the company prohibited all pranks, updated safety policies to address behavioral risks, and incorporated the footage into internal safety training. It was January 12, 2018, in Quezon City, Philippines, just before noon, inside a small apartment kitchen. The space was tight and ordinary, appliances humming as usual. A phone sat propped on the counter, recording continuously, capturing what was meant to be a harmless moment as it unfolded without pause. Paulo Reyes was 34 years old. He worked as an office clerk for a logistics company, spending long days handling paperwork and inventory reports. At home, he preferred simple routines, quick meals, short videos, and quiet time before heading back out. He and his wife occasionally filmed light-hearted prank clips in their kitchen. Nothing elaborate, just everyday moments meant to entertain friends and private chats. None of their videos involved stunts or planning. The phone was usually set down, recording continuously. That morning, Paolo stood near the counter, peeling a banana. He leaned slightly forward, resting his weight on one foot, scrolling briefly on his phone between bites. His wife stood a few feet away, holding her own phone pointed toward him. The camera angle captured his upper body, the counter, and part of the tiled floor. There was no warning, no setup visible in the frame. As Paolo raised the banana toward his mouth, his wife stepped closer and pushed his head forward in a sudden motion. The push was quick and forceful enough to interrupt his movement mid-bite. The banana entered his mouth deeper than intended and lodged immediately. The phone recorded the moment his body stiffened. Paolo staggered back half a step. His hands flew to his throat. The banana blocked his airway, preventing him from breathing or speaking. The camera audio picked up harsh coughing sounds that quickly turned silent and strained. He bent forward at the waist, then straightened again, trying to draw air that would not come. The phone kept recording as laughter dropped away. Paolo's coughing weakened. He braced against the counter, unable to draw air. His face flushed, his chest strained, and then his knees gave out. He slid down and collapsed onto the kitchen floor as the phone was set down nearby. The footage shows brief twitching as his body struggled, then stillness. His wife shouted for help and tried to clear his airway, but the timestamps show the movement slowed and became minimal within the next minute. A neighbor contacted emergency services after hearing shouting. Dispatch logs show the call at 11:46 a.m. Paramedics arrived within minutes and attempted airway support on the kitchen floor, but Paolo showed no response and was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as asphyxia caused by a complete airway blockage. The banana became lodged deep in the airway, triggering a reflex closure and preventing effective breathing. There were no injuries or medical conditions that contributed. Police reviewed the phone footage, classified the death as accidental, and secured the video as evidence without filing charges. In the weeks that followed, local health agencies cited the case in advisories about choking risks and food-related pranks. It was June 25, 2016 in Tampa, Florida, during a crowded house party marking the start of summer. Music played, people drifted between rooms, and attention stayed outside where fireworks were being prepared. Inside the house, a separate joke unfolded, one that no one was watching closely enough to stop. One of the guests was Alex Moreno, 23 years old. He worked part-time at a sporting goods store and shared an apartment nearby with two roommates. Friends described him as outgoing and willing to go along with jokes, especially when alcohol was involved. He had no medical conditions and was considered healthy. That night, Alex had been drinking but was still alert and moving around the house, talking with guests. The home belonged to a friend who was moving out at the end of the month. Cardboard boxes and packed items lined the hallway, including a large hard-shell suitcase left open near the stairs. Earlier in the evening, someone joked about how big it was. Alex, laughing, climbed inside to prove he could fit. Several people gathered around, filming briefly on their phones. At first, the suitcase was left open. Alex curled his knees toward his chest, joking and calling out to people nearby. A friend reached down and pulled the zipper partway, stopping at Alex's waist. Someone else zipped it a little farther, still laughing. The zipper closed fully a few seconds later. At nearly the same moment, fireworks were lit outside. A group rushed toward the front yard, cheering and filming the sparks. Music volume increased. The house emptied quickly, leaving the hallway quiet. The suitcase remained upright against the wall. Inside the suitcase, Alex began shifting almost immediately. The hard shell restricted movement, forcing his knees toward his chest. Once fully zipped, airflow was limited to small gaps along the zipper and seams. The fabric lining dampened sound, muting any movement from inside. Video recorded outside during the fireworks later captured faint, irregular thumping coming from inside the house, barely audible beneath music and crowd noise. No one reacted. Most guests were focused on filming the display or talking in the yard. No one returned indoors for several minutes. As time passed, the confined space restricted chest expansion and ventilation. Carbon dioxide rapidly accumulated inside the suitcase, while heat and panic increased oxygen demand. making effective breathing progressively harder. According to the medical review, loss of coordination and strength would likely follow within minutes. Movements inside the suitcase slowed. At some point, the case tipped slightly onto its side, likely from internal shifting. After that, there were no further sounds. Nearly 40 minutes later, a guest went back inside to grab a drink and noticed the suitcase in the living room. Someone joked about Alex still being inside. The zipper was pulled open, but Alex did not respond. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and attempted resuscitation on the living room floor. There were no signs of recovery. Alex was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the death as asphyxia from oxygen deprivation. There were no injuries, trauma, or toxic substances involved. Investigators reviewed phone videos and nearby security footage and classified the incident as a fatal prank caused by reckless behavior. No charges were filed. In the aftermath, the homeowner canceled the move-out party and cooperated fully with investigators. Local fire safety officials later cited the case in public advisories about the dangers of enclosed spaces and the speed at which oxygen loss can occur. The suitcase was logged as evidence and later destroyed. Friends removed party videos from social media within days. Clips of the fireworks remained online briefly before being taken down. It was October 14th, 2017, in Port Charlotte, Florida, during a crowded house party marking the start of the Halloween season. Music spilled into the street as guests moved between the living room, backyard, and driveway. Fireworks popped near the curb, drawing most people outside while smaller pranks continued inside without much attention. Lena Cruz was 21 years old, a college student studying hospitality management. She worked part-time at a cafe and spent weekends with the same group of friends she'd known since high school. They often filmed short prank clips for social media. Simple scares, costumes, and reactions meant to be funny rather than elaborate. With Halloween weekend approaching, the group had been talking about ideas that might get more attention. That night, someone suggested a roadside scare. Lena volunteered to wear a long white dress and stand briefly in the road so passing drivers would see a ghost-like figure in their headlights. One friend would film from the shoulder. The plan was for Lena to step out, wait a second, then move back as the car slowed. They assumed drivers would brake when they saw her, and that the scare would last only a moment. What they failed to account for was the road itself. The street curved slightly, had no paved shoulder, and was bordered by a shallow drainage ditch on one side and a fixed concrete culvert marker on the other. Traffic was light, but cars moved quickly along the unlit connector road, where drivers routinely exceeded posted limits late at night when the street appeared empty. Lena changed behind a parked motorcycle, pulling on a long white dress and letting her hair hang loose. A phone was set a few yards back, aimed toward the curve in the road. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as a car approached at speed. On video, Lena steps off the pavement, lifting her arms slightly as the dress catches the light. The car does not slow down. The headlights jerk sideways as the driver swerves. The front corner of the vehicle strikes her almost instantly, throwing her onto the road as the car veers into a concrete post and grinds to a stop. Audio on the recording shifts abruptly as the camera jolts and the person filming moves toward the roadway. Lena lies motionless near the impact point, her dress darkening against the asphalt. The driver stumbles out of the car, shouting for help as the engine clicks and goes quiet. Lena's friends place the emergency call immediately, giving the location and reporting a pedestrian strike. The phone continues recording as the group backs away from the road. Responders arrive within minutes and confirm Lena shows no signs of life. The driver is treated at the scene for minor injuries. The medical examiner ruled Lena's death the result of multiple blunt force injuries sustained on impact. Investigators determined the driver swerved to avoid a sudden obstruction on an unlit road and had less than 2 seconds to react. Phone footage confirmed Lena entered the lane moments before the collision, and the driver was cleared of wrongdoing. Investigators also determined that Lena had volunteered for the prank and was not directed or physically restrained by others. No charges were filed against her friends. In the days that followed, Local authorities issued warnings urging residents to avoid roadside pranks and costumes near traffic. The video circulated briefly online before being removed by the platform for violating safety policies. The stretch of road remained unchanged, though warning signs were later added nearby. It was April 17, 2019, in Toledo, Ohio, during a mandatory spring assembly at a public high school. Nearly the entire student body filled the auditorium for testing announcements. Seats and aisles were packed, exits crowded, and staff focused on schedules. It appeared routine, but the space left little room for error. Evan Brooks was 14 years old, a freshman who had transferred earlier that year. He was smaller than most of the students around him and still learning how to navigate the school's layout. Evan was quiet, kept to a small group of friends, and usually chose seats near exits, so he could leave quickly when assemblies ended. That afternoon, he sat near the rear auditorium doors that opened directly into a concrete stairwell leading down to the main hallway. The school had held assemblies like this many times before. The building was older, with narrow stairwells designed decades earlier, before current crowd flow standards were common. Fire alarms were positioned near exits, and staff relied on students following instructions during drills. What administrators did not know was that two upperclassmen seated near the back had planned a prank. They intended to pull the fire alarm, film the reaction on a phone, and post the chaos online. They assumed teachers would stop the movement quickly, as they had during past drills. As the final announcements were being read, a phone camera in the back row began recording. The view showed rows of students standing, bags at their feet, and the rear exit doors only a few steps away. Seconds later, the fire alarm sounded. The sharp, continuous tone cut through the auditorium, louder than the speakers. Students reacted immediately. The phone footage captured heads turning, chairs scraping, and bodies pushing toward the nearest exits. Shouting replaced conversation. The rear doors swung open, and the flow of students poured into the stairwell. Hallway CCTV captured what happened next. The stairwell filled almost instantly, far beyond its intended capacity. Students moved downward shoulder to shoulder, backpacks pressed tight. Near the top of the stairs, Evan stepped forward with the crowd. His foot caught on the edge of a step as someone behind him pushed. He stumbled, then fell forward onto the concrete. The surge did not stop. Students behind him, unable to see what happened, tripped over his body. Others were forced forward by the pressure from above. Evan was pushed sideways into the metal railing lining the stairwell. CCTV showed the railing flexing as bodies pressed against it. The phone video captured the sound of shoes slipping, students yelling to stop, and metal creaking under strain. Within seconds, Evan was pinned. His chest was compressed against the railing as the crowd continued moving downward. Those closest tried to pull back, but the force from behind made it impossible. The railing bent further, trapping him in place. The phone footage showed arms reaching, hands slipping, and faces panicked as the situation spiraled beyond control. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived shortly after and worked in the stairwell, clearing students away. When Evan was pulled free and assessed on the floor, he showed no signs of breathing. The medical examiner ruled Evan's death as compressive asphyxia. Sustained crowd pressure crushed his chest, preventing normal breathing. There were no major external injuries. Death resulted from a lack of oxygen during the surge. Review of phone video and hallway CCTV traced the event from the alarm pull to the stairwell overload. The student responsible was charged in juvenile court with involuntary manslaughter. The school later altered assembly procedures, redesigned stairwell flow, and updated fire alarm protocols using the footage as a safety example. It was May 8, 2016 in Cebu City, Philippines. The heat inside a small neighborhood furniture shop lingered even in the late morning, and workers moved between sanding tables, stacks of lumber, and partially finished cabinets. The shop was undergoing renovations, leaving scraps of wood, loose boards, and exposed metal brackets scattered around the floor. A single ceiling fan rotated slowly, barely pushing the warm air. Among the employees was 38-year-old Marlon Rivera, A general laborer who handled sanding, lifting finished panels, and organizing supplies. He lived a short walk from the shop and usually changed into his outdoor slippers during break times to cool off his feet. Co-workers said the group often played small pranks, usually harmless, like hiding tools or taping labels to each other's backs. That morning, one of the workers decided to escalate the joke. While Marlon worked in the finishing area, a co-worker picked up his outdoor slippers and hammered a short nail upward through the rubber sole. Only the very tip protruded inside, angled just enough to create a sharp jab when stepped on. According to the prankster's later statement, he expected nothing more than a startled yell or a quick hop, something the group had joked about doing for weeks. He did not consider how the shop's renovation hazards might interact with the prank. The work zone behind Marlon was especially cluttered that week. Renovation crews had opened a narrow trench to run wiring, covering part of it with a loose sheet of plywood to reduce dust. The board sat unevenly on the edges of the cutout, shifting when stepped on. Nearby, metal brackets removed from an old shelving unit were stacked on the floor. One bracket had slid off earlier that morning and ended up leaning at an angle with one corner pointing upward. Workers noticed it but left it where it was, planning to clean the area later. Around noon, Marlon stepped away from his sanding station for a short break. CCTV footage showed him walking toward the corner where he always kept his slippers. He put on the left one first, then slid his right foot into the sabotage slipper. The moment he shifted his weight, he reacted. The nail punctured the skin near his heel, causing him to jerk backward in reflex. The sudden jolt sent his left foot searching for balance. Instead, it landed on the loose plywood sheet behind him. The sheet, about 4 feet by 2 feet, had been laid as a temporary cover over a wiring trench and was resting unevenly on the cutout's edges. When his weight pressed onto its near side, the board pivoted and flipped upward, collapsing his stance instantly and throwing him straight backward. He fell onto a metal bracket that had tipped earlier that morning. Its corner was lodged upright at roughly a 30-degree angle, positioned just beyond the plywood's edge. CCTV footage captured the impact clearly. Marlon's lower back struck the exposed corner with full force, the bracket shifting sideways from the blow before settling flat. Several workers turned at the sound, a sharp, heavy impact followed by the sudden stillness of his body. He lay motionless beside the overturned board, the plywood cracked from the flip, and the bracket partially buried under him. Co-workers rushed over, pulling debris away, and calling for assistance as others stepped back, realizing he was not responding. Witnesses later told investigators that he never regained movement from the moment he hit the floor. Emergency responders assessed him where he fell and transported him out of the shop, but the injuries were already catastrophic. The medical examiner later confirmed severe internal hemorrhage caused by concentrated blunt force trauma to the lower back, matching the bracket's position beneath him. The nail puncture that triggered his reflexive step was minor, but it set off the precise chain of events that led to the fatal fall. It was February 10th, 2017, inside an automotive workshop in Detroit, Michigan. The morning had been routine, with mechanics moving between lifts, compressors running in the background, and workers taking staggered lunches while the shop stayed partially open. 29-year-old Tyrell Mason had been hired only 3 weeks earlier as a tire technician. He worked part-time at the shop while taking night classes in diesel mechanics. Co-workers described him as quiet, but easygoing, someone who tried to blend in with the crew. The workshop had a history of rough pranks during downtime, mostly harmless blasts of compressed air across the room or tapping someone's shoulder with a hose from several feet away. Tyrell had joked about it earlier in the week, but never handled the high-pressure hoses himself. The shop's compressed air system was designed for clearing metal shavings from machinery and blowing debris out of wheel rims. According to inventory logs, the industrial compressor produced air pressure far higher than handheld hobby units, enough force to clean equipment, but also enough to cause internal injury if misused. OSHA later noted that this level of compressed air can penetrate clothing and enter the body through vulnerable areas, causing severe internal injury. Around lunchtime, several employees remained inside while others stepped out to eat. Tyrell stayed behind to retrieve a tool he had forgotten on a rolling cart near the alignment bay. CCTV footage showed him leaning forward slightly as he reached for it. creating a small gap between the hem of his shirt and the waistband of his coveralls. At that moment, a co-worker walked toward him, holding an air hose that had been left connected to the compressor. Others on the floor later told investigators they assumed he planned to give Tyrell a playful burst of air from a distance, something that, while unsafe, had become a common joke in the shop. But instead of spraying him from a few feet away, the co-worker moved in close, pressed the nozzle directly against the fabric of Tyrell's lower back, and squeezed the trigger. The security footage captured the action clearly. Witnesses nearby said the hose produced a sharp, concentrated blast, much louder and stronger than the brief low-pressure spurts usually used during their pranks. Because the nozzle was pressed directly against him, the high-pressure air forced its way through the clothing into the lower body, a mechanism documented in industrial air injection injuries. Workers nearby reported a brief strained sound as his body tensed and he dropped to his knees almost immediately. He clutched his abdomen and then rolled onto his side. The co-worker who held the hose stepped back immediately, realizing the reaction was not what he expected. For a moment, nearby workers hesitated, thinking it was still part of the prank. But when Tyrell didn't respond and his breathing became shallow, someone immediately called for help. A senior technician contacted 911, while another stayed beside him to keep him still. According to later statements, Tyrell became unresponsive within moments. Paramedics from the local Michigan EMS unit arrived within minutes and were directed through the service bays to the tool area. Employees moved aside as responders began a rapid assessment, checking airway, breathing, and circulation before attempting stabilization. According to the official report, the high-pressure air had caused severe internal injury and rapid organ damage. Despite immediate intervention, Tyrell showed no signs of recovery and was pronounced dead at the scene. Detroit police forwarded the case to prosecutors for review, evaluating whether the co-worker's actions met the standard for reckless endangerment or involuntary manslaughter. After examining the footage and statements, prosecutors declined to file criminal charges, concluding that the act was a negligent workplace prank rather than intentional harm. The co-worker was terminated from employment, and OSHA penalties were directed at the shop for failing to prevent unsafe behavior. It was September 3, 2016, along a quiet rural road outside Chiang Mai, Thailand. The area was mostly farmland, with long stretches of open fields and only the occasional vehicle passing through. A narrow dirt pull-off sat beside the two-lane road, commonly used by field workers to rest before continuing their shifts. A small produce shed stood nearby, where a few seasonal workers stored tools and equipment for the surrounding farms. That was where the incident began. 24-year-old Kittisak Arun, known as Kit, worked part-time as a helper at the shed, organizing crates and assisting farmers loading small trucks. Co-workers described him as easygoing and willing to do whatever task was needed. During breaks, Kit and 3 friends often filmed short prank clips for their social page, mostly harmless jokes involving simple props from the shed, tipped hats, fake insects, or playful jumps meant to make viewers laugh. That afternoon, the group decided to film another reaction-based prank. Someone suggested loosening a rung on the old aluminum ladder stored along the wall. The idea was to make it wobble slightly when Kit stepped on it, capturing his startled reaction on video. They had pulled similar pranks before, never removing screws entirely, only tapping a tool against a rung or tilting the ladder slightly to get a harmless laugh. This time, however, one friend removed 2 screws holding a lower rung, expecting it to sag just enough to startle him. They didn't consider that the ladder was often used beside tall, unstable stacks of produce crates. When Kit returned from moving a sack of fertilizer, the camera was already recording from a corner shelf. A co-worker asked him to retrieve a box of ties stored on the higher shelf above the stacked crates. Security footage from the shed showed Kit positioning the ladder beside the crates and placing his weight on the first step. It held. He climbed to the second rung, reached upward, and shifted his weight again. As soon as he stepped on the loosened rung, it tilted downward under his foot. The sudden drop caused him to jerk backward, instinctively tightening his grip on the side rails. That shift pulled the ladder off balance, and because it stood so close to the stacked produce crates, the legs slid sideways. The entire structure tipped. The footage captured Kit falling from a height of roughly 6.5 feet. As the ladder toppled, his back struck the sharp corner of a metal pallet positioned beside the crates. One crate collapsed beside him, spilling produce across the floor. Workers nearby turned immediately at the sound of metal hitting concrete. Kit lay motionless as his friends rushed over, realizing too late that the prank had gone far beyond a simple joke. Someone ran toward the road to flag help from a passing vehicle, while another attempted to keep Kit still. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the injuries were severe. The medical examiner later confirmed that he suffered blunt force trauma to the chest, resulting in rapid internal bleeding. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Police interviewed the workers and reviewed the shed's footage. Investigators noted that the removed screws directly contributed to the ladder's instability. The prank was deemed negligent, not intentional harm. The co-worker who loosened the rung was terminated, and the shed's operators reinforced safety rules, banning all pranks on equipment. It was October 27, 2018, inside a seasonal Halloween warehouse in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. The store was busy preparing weekend displays, and employees moved props, boxes, and lighting equipment across the concrete floor, while themed music played over the speakers. 55-year-old Brian Lucas had worked at the warehouse for over a decade as a forklift operator, handling unloading and pallet storage. Co-workers said he startled easily, especially during Halloween setups, and his medical file noted mild hypertension. Despite this, the team often played small seasonal pranks, activating animatronics or hiding toy spiders. That week, a group planned a bigger joke using a lightweight foam coffin kept near the holiday display area. They selected Brian because he frequently helped move bulky props and was known to react strongly to surprises. The plan was simple. He would be asked to help lift the coffin while a co-worker hidden inside pushed the lid open and shouted. Another worker would assist on the opposite end to keep the prank controlled. No one involved expected any danger. They intended to record a quick reaction for a private group chat. On the afternoon of October 27th, security cameras showed Brian walking toward the display area after being told the coffin needed to be repositioned. The prop itself weighed under 40 pounds, made of molded foam with a hinged lid attached by plastic brackets. Decorations were stacked around the aisle, and two co-workers positioned themselves as planned, one at the far end ready to lift, and the other hidden inside, waiting for the signal. Footage showed Brian bending down and gripping his side of the coffin near the base. As he pulled upward, the lid shifted slightly, creating a gap. At that exact moment, the employee inside thrust the lid open and lunged forward in a sitting motion. Witnesses said he also shouted to maximize the scare. Brian reacted immediately. He jerked backward, his shoulders rising sharply as he lost balance. He took 2 uneven steps as his balance faltered, raised a hand toward his chest, and reached for a nearby shelving post but failed to grip it. Within seconds, he lost stability completely and collapsed onto the concrete floor. The co-worker who had jumped out stopped instantly, abandoning the prank. One called his name, while the other shouted toward the office for help. Emergency services were contacted at once. The first responders arrived shortly after and were guided through the storage racks to Brian's location. From the position of most employees standing nearby, it was clear that Brian was unresponsive as responders worked. They assessed his condition on the floor while staff were directed to step back toward the main aisle. Later that evening, officials confirmed that Brian Lucas died from a sudden cardiac arrhythmia triggered by acute stress from the scare, compounded by underlying hypertension. Investigators reviewed the security footage and interviewed the employees involved to document the exact sequence of the prank and the moment the collapse occurred. Following the incident, the warehouse discontinued all jump scare activities among staff and updated internal safety guidelines. Prosecutors declined to file charges, determining that the scare did not meet the legal standard for reckless endangerment. The 2 employees involved were suspended and later terminated for violating workplace conduct policies, while OSHA penalties were issued to the warehouse for failing to prevent unsafe pranks among staff. The foam coffin prop was removed from the planned display and marked as evidence during the review. It was April 14, 2018 in Houston, Texas. inside a small apartment complex where several young tenants filmed casual food challenges for their shared social page. That afternoon, they prepared another recording in the kitchen, setting up a tripod and arranging plates of chicken wings on the counter. 23-year-old Jacob Ellis lived with 2 roommates in the unit. He worked as a delivery driver and often joined their simple food challenge videos. Jacob had mild asthma, which his friends knew about but rarely saw as a concern since he kept it controlled with an inhaler. He usually avoided hot sauces, a running joke in their recordings. That night's video was meant to compare mild wings with a slightly hotter batch. While Jacob stepped into the kitchen, his roommates quietly swapped his plate with wings coated in concentrated pepper extract, a novelty sauce far stronger than normal. They later said they expected only an exaggerated reaction for the camera and did not consider how the extreme heat could affect his asthma. When the recording started, Jacob sat at the table and reached for the first wing without hesitation. The footage showed him taking several bites, chewing normally at first. After swallowing, he paused and coughed once, as if surprised by the sudden heat. Within moments, the cough returned, sharper and more frequent. He leaned closer to the table, bracing himself with one hand as the coughing grew intense. According to the others in the room, they initially assumed it was all part of the video. They were used to exaggerated reactions during food challenges, and nothing about the first few seconds seemed alarming. But the coughing didn't stop. Jacob pushed his chair backward so fast that it toppled to the floor. The camera caught him standing abruptly, gripping the edge of the table for support. He tried to move toward the kitchen sink, but the force of the coughs made it difficult for him to stay balanced. He pressed a hand against his chest and turned toward the hallway, attempting to walk toward the apartment exit where he hoped to get fresh air. Security footage showed Jacob stumbling out the front door, gripping the metal railing as he coughed in rapid, uneven bursts. His posture tightened before he dropped to his knees, still trying to inhale. A roommate followed with a phone and another appeared holding his inhaler, but Jacob's coughing weakened quickly. He leaned against the railing until his legs gave out, and he collapsed on the concrete landing. Responders arrived and took over, clearing the walkway as residents were moved back inside. Officials later confirmed that Jacob Ellis died from acute bronchospasm leading to respiratory failure, triggered by the concentrated pepper extract and worsened by his underlying asthma. Investigators reviewed the prank footage and lobby camera, examined the extract's warnings, and interviewed the roommates. The case was classified as a fatal prank involving misuse of concentrated pepper extract during a staged food challenge. The apartment complex later issued reminders about safe filming practices, and the social page was taken offline. Jacob's videos were removed from public access. It was August 2, 2015, at a cliffside lookout in Sedona, Arizona. The weather was clear, and the visibility stretched for miles across the red rock formations. Weekend hikers moved along marked paths, stopping at narrow ledges that overlooked steep drops into the canyons below. The sandstone in this area was known for being brittle in some sections, and signs advised visitors to stay back from the edge and watch for loose gravel. Among the hiking groups was 31-year-old Carlos Peña, a warehouse assistant from Flagstaff who spent weekends on easy climbs and local trails. A coworker invited him to join a small group that filmed simple prank videos for their social page. Their clips used battery-powered drills with no bits, pressed against rock to make a loud rattling sound and fake the illusion of a ledge being damaged. Carlos had seen a few of their videos but had never participated. During the hike, they explained the plan. He would stand near a dramatic overlook while another member pressed the spinning drill against the sandstone to stage a slip for the camera. The drill was harmless, but the sound could convince someone unfamiliar with the prank that the rock had weakened. They reached a narrow sandstone platform that extended about 3 to 4 feet beyond the main trail. The ledge sat slightly lower than the walking path, and the surface sloped outward toward the canyon. Several hikers had already stopped there earlier in the day to take pictures, leaving clear footprints and patches of disturbed gravel along the edge. A weathered metal sign was posted a few yards back, warning visitors that the rock formations in that area were prone to cracking and that the outer ledges had unstable surfaces. Despite this, the spot remained popular because the overhang created a clean drop behind anyone standing there, which made the background look dramatic in photos and videos. The group positioned itself on the flattest section. Carlos stepped closest to the edge because he was the tallest, and would help frame the shot. Footage reviewed later showed him standing only a few inches from the drop, his boots near a thin scatter of loose gravel. Behind him, one of the pranksters held a small battery-powered hand drill. It was a simple model with an empty chamber that spun easily when the trigger was pressed. The prankster angled himself slightly to Carlos's left, so the sound would carry clearly without hitting him. In the recording, the drill suddenly revved. The motor whined at a high pitch, and the chuck rattled loudly when the prankster pressed it against the sandstone surface. The noise echoed against the rock wall behind them. According to witnesses, the sound was abrupt enough that someone unfamiliar with drilling noises might assume something had cracked. Carlos reacted instantly. He reflexively shifted backward at the sudden noise, but his right foot landed on a thin layer of loose gravel that slid immediately under his weight. Witnesses saw the stones slide under him, leaving nothing to grip. He threw his arms out, but the outward sloping sandstone behind him dropped away, and he went over the cliff within a second. Hikers on a lower outcrop heard the fall and saw dust rise from the impact area. Rangers later estimated the drop at roughly 70 to 90 feet. Two members of the group followed a worn path downward and reached him within minutes, but witnesses confirmed he showed no movement. The uneven terrain made it difficult to get close without slipping. Rangers arrived shortly after being notified by another hiker. Investigators later used the prank recording to determine where he had been standing, the angle of the drill, how close his boots were to the gravel, and the moment the loose stones shifted under him. The video provided a clear sequence that matched the physical evidence on the ledge and the measurements taken by the Rangers. Rangers documented the ledge, noting loose fragments and the thin gravel layer that had shifted beneath his boot. The fall distance and impact location were consistent with fatal injuries. The death was classified as accidental, with the prank identified as the direct trigger that caused the backward step. The group ended its prank page shortly afterward. Park officials reinforced warnings along the lookout and reminded visitors to avoid stage stunts near cliff edges, noting how quickly a controlled joke could become a real emergency. It was January 14th, 2016, in downtown Seattle, where morning rain left the sidewalks and building entrances slick with moisture. Inside a 15-story office tower, the marble floors near the elevator bank still showed a faint sheen from recent cleaning, and small puddles accumulated where employees tracked in water from outside. The 15th floor housed the claims department of a long-established regional insurance firm. Most staff filtered in just before 9 a.m., hanging damp coats, shaking off umbrellas, and settling into cubicles that overlooked the city's dense winter clouds. Witnesses later told investigators the atmosphere was typical for a rainy weekday, quiet enough to hear phones ringing and keyboards tapping, but busy with employees preparing for morning meetings. Harold Hal Peterson, 52, had arrived shortly before the usual rush. Co-workers noted he followed his routine precisely, stopping at his desk only briefly before heading toward the conference area with his briefcase, printed reports, and laptop. He was known for maintaining strict timing before presentations, often walking the corridors at a brisk, practiced pace. A few minutes earlier, several employees had noticed junior adjuster Jason Mitchell lingering near the break room with a small bottle taken from the kitchenette cabinet. Security footage later showed him applying a thin, nearly invisible coat of cooking oil across a narrow stretch of marble just outside the conference room entrance. Staff members told investigators he had done it as a workplace prank meant to make Hal slip briefly during his usual rushed walk. He then returned to his desk with a clear view of the hallway, and co-workers later recalled him glancing up repeatedly as though anticipating a reaction. At 8:47 a.m., Hal walked toward the conference room, carrying both his laptop bag and an overfilled briefcase. Witnesses saw him approach the conference room at his usual pace, adjusting the shoulder strap of his bag as he neared the freshly polished marble strip. The moment his right shoe contacted the oil, his foot slid forward sharply. He attempted to brace himself, but the combination of the slick surface, the weight of the bags, and his forward momentum caused him to fall sideways. Several employees seated nearby reported hearing the initial slip, followed by a heavy impact, as Hal struck the floor and then the lower portion of the glass wall panel beside the conference doorway. Investigators noted the glass did not shatter, but the corner of the metal frame created a focused point of impact against the side of Hal's head. Witnesses saw him roll slightly onto his back with minimal movement afterward. A pool of blood formed within seconds, spreading across the marble and mixing with the thin layer of oil. Employees called emergency services immediately. Paramedics reached the floor approximately 6 minutes later and began treatment in the hallway. They documented a severe skull fracture and traumatic brain injury consistent with a concentrated lateral impact. Hal never regained responsiveness and was pronounced dead at a nearby trauma facility later that afternoon. Floor staff provided investigators with hallway footage and written statements confirming the sequence of events. The small bottle of cooking oil was recovered from the break room cabinet, and residue on the marble matched the area where Hal slipped. Investigators concluded that Jason had applied the oil as a workplace prank intended to cause a brief slip, not realizing the risk it created. The official finding listed the death as resulting from blunt force head trauma following intentional tampering with a walking surface. Jason was removed from the building during the inquiry and later faced charges connected to the incident. It was April 7, 2015, in Richmond, Virginia, where mild spring weather contrasted with the controlled environment of a high-level chemistry classroom inside a local academic building. Students in an advanced chemistry course had gathered for their final practical demonstrations, and the lab had been prepared earlier that morning with standard safety checks, diluted reagents, and designated presentation benches arranged in rows. The assignment required students to explain reaction rates using safe, low-concentration chemicals. Staff members overseeing the event later described the room as orderly and quiet, with students reviewing notes while waiting their turn. The benches held only teacher-approved materials, and each setup included safety goggles, gloves, and labeled containers of diluted acids, bases, and catalysts appropriate for high school-level reactions. 17-year-old Rachel Morrison began arranging her demonstration on reaction rate changes using low-molarity sulfuric acid and metal catalysts. Witnesses later said she moved confidently between her materials, pausing occasionally to review her checklist and confirm proper placement of each item. She had earned a reputation for precision in lab work and often completed assignments ahead of schedule. Her lab partner, Brad Williams, had prepared a separate segment of the presentation. Several students later told investigators they had noticed him handling a clicker-style mechanical noise device he had brought from home. The device, which produced a sharp snapping sound similar to a loud cap popper, was intended as a prank to startle Rachel during her presentation. Brad said later he believed it would cause a brief pause or nervous laugh, and had not considered the effect it might have near glassware and reactive materials. As Rachel began demonstrating how catalyst surface area affects reaction rate, she moved to record her observations on the worksheet. When she reached for her pen, Brad triggered the noise device behind her. Multiple students stated they heard a sudden, sharp crack that echoed against the lab's tile and metal surfaces. Startled, Rachel flinched and knocked her forearm against a beaker containing the diluted acid solution. The beaker tipped, spilling the liquid across the bench and onto her neck and jawline. Witnesses near the front row saw her instinctively step backward, striking another piece of glassware that slid off the bench and shattered on the floor. In her attempt to steady herself, she slipped on the spreading liquid and fell to the ground. Students reported that Rachel immediately showed signs of chemical burns, including reddening skin and difficulty keeping her eyes open. Lab staff activated the emergency shower within seconds, but some of the solution had already reached sensitive areas around her airway. When she inhaled sharply during the initial shock, misted droplets entered her upper respiratory tract, causing swelling that made breathing progressively harder. Emergency responders arrived in 4 minutes and initiated airway support while flushing affected areas. Despite their efforts, the combination of chemical burns and airway damage led to complications over the following hours. Rachel was pronounced dead at a nearby medical facility later that evening. Investigators collected statements from students and staff, confirming that the noise device had been used intentionally as a prank in close proximity to active lab materials. The official finding listed the death as resulting from chemical burns and airway injury following an unintended spill triggered by a disruptive device. Brad was removed from campus during the investigation and later faced juvenile charges related to the incident. It was August 29, 2017, in Flagstaff, Arizona, where late summer heat settled over the city, and delivery drivers moved through their afternoon routes. The highways north of Flagstaff featured steep grades, narrow curves, and frequent elevation changes, conditions that required steady attention from commercial drivers. Reports from other drivers on the same route later described the traffic as light and the pavement dry, with clear visibility across the mountain corridor. Carlos Mendoza, 23, had begun his scheduled circuit through rural delivery points earlier that morning. According to company logs, he was operating a loaded cargo van equipped with standard safety restraints and an onboard GPS unit that tracked position and speed. Co-workers later described Carlos as consistent with his timing and careful with route procedures, often checking in during rest stops to confirm his progress. His phone was kept on the dashboard mount, a common practice among drivers who relied on navigation and dispatcher updates. Investigators later learned that Carlos had asked relatives to contact him if any family medical issues arose, and records showed that his phone was active throughout the day. His cousin, Miguel Mendoza, had sent messages to him before, often using spoofed numbers as part of ongoing pranks. Phone metadata later confirmed that on this day, Miguel used a number masking application to send messages purporting to be from a local medical facility. The texts were timed to reach Carlos while he was traveling through one of the tighter sections of the mountain highway. At 3:18 p.m., the GPS record showed Carlos entering a segment of roadway characterized by a downhill grade and a series of consecutive curves. Around this same time, his phone received multiple spoofed emergency messages. Crash analysts later reconstructed the sequence. The van's speed increased above the posted limit within seconds of the alerts arriving, and braking patterns showed brief, intermittent inputs rather than controlled deceleration. Investigators concluded that the combination of high speed and distraction reduced his ability to react to the approaching turn. Tire marks on the asphalt indicated that the van drifted toward the center line before sharply correcting. The correction steered the vehicle toward the outside guardrail, striking it at an angle that exceeded the barrier's capacity to redirect the van. The rail buckled and detached from two posts, allowing the vehicle to leave the roadway. The van descended a steep, rocky embankment before coming to rest against a stand of small pine trees roughly 180 feet downslope. A driver traveling several minutes behind Carlos reported seeing dust rise from the embankment and notified emergency services. Responders reached the site within 9 minutes and found the van heavily damaged with no signs of survivable injury. The official medical assessment stated that the blunt force trauma sustained during the descent and final impact was incompatible with life. Investigators examined Carlos's phone, confirming that the emergency messages were fabricated and delivered through a masking application. The timing of the texts aligned with the moment the vehicle accelerated beyond safe limits and deviated from its lane position. The final report identified the cause of the crash as loss of control due to driver distraction triggered by fraudulent messages sent as a prank. Miguel was interviewed during the inquiry and later faced charges related to the incident. It was November 12, 2014, in Mobile, Alabama, where mild autumn temperatures and clear skies made for steady afternoon foot traffic around a neighborhood convenience store on the city's west side. Regular customers moved in and out of the building, and the parking lot security cameras recorded a typical Friday pattern of brief visits and routine transactions. Dorothy Williams, 63, arrived shortly after 3 p.m. According to store footage, she followed her usual pattern of purchasing a small set of low-cost items and a selection of scratch-off lottery tickets from the counter display. Witnesses later described her as a quiet regular who often completed her purchases without extended conversation. That afternoon, the store was staffed by a single employee, 19-year-old Tyler Jackson, who handled transactions while restocking shelves between customers. Investigators later learned that Tyler had been experimenting with pranks involving altered promotional materials. He had produced a set of imitation scratch-off cards designed to display misleading results when revealed. The cards were not inserted into any state-regulated dispensers, but were mixed into a small stack of promotional giveaway tickets kept near the counter. Several employees reported during interviews that Tyler had shown them these modified cards in the past, describing them as jokes intended to surprise customers, with unusual or obviously incorrect results. Security footage confirmed that the promotional stack had been left on the counter within easy reach of customers. When Dorothy completed her purchase, she picked up one of the imitation cards along with her legitimate tickets, a detail Tyler later acknowledged he noticed but did not correct. She returned to her vehicle and began scratching the legitimate tickets first, then the altered one. A customer walking toward the store noticed Dorothy exit her vehicle and approach the counter holding the imitation ticket. Audio in the store did not capture the full exchange, but investigators noted that Dorothy questioned the legitimacy of the ticket, and Tyler informed her it was not valid and originated from the promotional stack. The customer reported seeing Dorothy pause after the explanation, brace her hand against the doorway frame, and appear momentarily unsteady, with a noticeable change in her breathing before she stepped back. Moments later, she lost balance and collapsed onto the concrete outside the entrance. Moments later, she collapsed onto the concrete apron outside the entrance. Bystanders called emergency services while store employees initiated basic first aid procedures. Responders arrived in approximately 5 minutes and documented an episode consistent with sudden cardiac arrest. Attempts at resuscitation continued during transport but were unsuccessful, and she was pronounced dead at a nearby medical facility. The medical review stated that Dorothy had underlying cardiovascular disease, including hypertension, and that the sudden physiological stress associated with the event was a contributing factor in the fatal arrhythmia. The report did not identify a single isolated cause, but cited an acute cardiac episode triggered during the interaction at the store. Investigators collected the altered promotional cards, along with store footage and employee statements. The final report concluded that the misleading scratch-off card had been created as part of a prank, and that its unintended distribution to a customer contributed to the chain of events leading to the medical emergency. Tyler was dismissed during the inquiry and later faced charges related to the production and distribution of unauthorized lottery-like materials. It was June 18, 2013, in Omaha, Nebraska, where a warm evening and steady 72-degree temperatures kept activity light around a small suburban warehouse complex on the city's northern edge. A maintenance crew had finished its daytime rounds hours earlier, and only a few office staff and late-shift workers remained inside the building as the sun began to set. Frank Rodriguez, 41, worked the evening inventory shift at the distribution facility. Company records showed he had been employed there for 11 months, primarily assisting with stock verification, forklift checks, and end-of-day equipment inspections. Co-workers later described him as methodical, often completing his tasks early and using the remaining time to organize tools and check equipment logs. The maintenance area, where he worked most evenings, contained ladders, extension cords, compressed air equipment, and rolling tool cabinets positioned along the concrete corridor. Multiple employees told investigators that a co-worker, 26-year-old Evan Clark, had a habit of staging minor practical jokes. These typically involved harmless alterations to shared equipment, such as switching labels or placing small objects inside tool drawers. Earlier in the week, Evan had discussed setting up what he called a quick scare for Frank involving an air hose commonly used for dusting equipment. Evan believed the noise alone, an abrupt release of compressed air, would startle Frank as he walked into the maintenance bay. Shortly after 8:30 p.m., security cameras recorded Evan attaching a zip tie to the trigger of an air nozzle and positioning the hose on a workbench near the entrance to the equipment area. He then ran the hose behind several toolboxes so that it rested partially across the walkway. Investigators later confirmed that Evan intended the hose to shift when stepped on, activating the air nozzle for a brief, loud burst of sound. At 8:47 p.m., Frank entered the maintenance bay carrying a clipboard and small parts container. The cameras showed him reviewing a checklist as he walked. When he stepped on the loosely positioned hose, it moved unexpectedly, tightening the attached zip tie and depressing the air nozzle trigger. The resulting blast of compressed air struck the metal workbench, creating a sharp impact noise that echoed across the concrete walls. Footage indicated that Frank reacted abruptly to the unexpected sound, stepping backward and to his right. His foot caught the edge of a low-rolling tool cabinet that had been left partially pulled out from the wall. Investigators documented that the cabinet moved under his weight, causing Frank to lose balance and fall sideways. He struck the back of his head on the corner of a steel equipment rack before collapsing to the floor. A nearby employee heard the sound of the fall and called for assistance. Emergency responders arrived within 6 minutes and initiated treatment. The medical team documented severe head trauma consistent with a high-force impact to a fixed metal surface. Frank was transported to a nearby medical facility, where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Investigators reviewed the security footage, examined the modified air hose assembly, and interviewed employees on site. The final report concluded that the death resulted from blunt force head trauma, following a fall triggered by a prank involving improperly secured compressed air equipment. Evan was dismissed during the investigation and later faced charges related to negligent tampering with workplace tools. It was February 3, 2018, in Dallas, Texas, where a cold 28-degree morning kept most employees indoors as staff prepared for a quarterly meeting inside a mid-sized corporate office building on the city's north side. The facility's conference level had been arranged the previous evening with projectors, printed handouts, and assigned seating for department managers scheduled to present their reports. Patricia Johnson, 39, served as human resources manager for the company and routinely handled quarterly updates on safety compliance, onboarding statistics, and policy adherence. According to building card access logs, she arrived shortly before 8 a.m. and spent the hour prior to the meeting reviewing her printed documents and finalizing notes at her workstation. Co-workers later described her as consistent with preparation habits, often rehearsing talking points before entering the conference room. The conference suite contained standard office equipment, including rolling presentation chairs, cable hubs beneath the table, and portable storage cabinets positioned along the wall for forms and supplies. Several employees later told investigators that a marketing assistant, 34-year-old Dennis Crawford, had been seen adjusting one of the chairs earlier in the morning. Crawford had a documented pattern of minor workplace pranks, typically involving stick-on labels or swapped office supplies. His actions that day included placing small caster wedges beneath one chair, thin plastic shims commonly used to stabilize uneven casters. When inserted improperly, the wedges caused the rear wheels to sit slightly off balance, making the chair prone to sudden backward movement when weight shifted. At 9 a.m., security footage showed department heads taking their seats as the meeting began. Patricia entered the room carrying a binder and laptop, moved toward the designated presenter's chair, and sat while arranging her materials. As she leaned forward to connect her laptop to the table hub, the altered chair shifted unexpectedly. The raised rear caster slipped from the unstable wedge, causing the chair to roll back several inches. Patricia attempted to stabilize herself by shifting her weight, but the sudden movement caused her center of gravity to tilt sharply backward. Footage captured her falling from the chair and striking the back of her head on the corner of a portable storage cabinet positioned against the wall behind her. Several attendees reported hearing the impact, followed by Patricia collapsing to the floor without regaining balance. A staff member activated the building's internal emergency alert, and trained personnel initiated first aid procedures while waiting for paramedics. Responders arrived within minutes and documented signs consistent with severe head trauma, including lack of responsiveness and observable bleeding from the point of impact. Patricia was transported to a nearby medical facility, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical review later cited a fatal skull fracture and intracranial hemorrhage, resulting from the backward fall onto a fixed metal surface. Investigators examined the conference room layout, recovered the plastic caster wedges, and reviewed footage showing Crawford placing them beneath the chair prior to the meeting. The final report determined that the instability created by the wedges caused the abrupt chair movement leading to the fall. Crawford was removed from duty during the inquiry and faced charges related to negligent tampering with office equipment. It was October 31st, 2017, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Plano, Texas. The evening air was cool, and moisture from earlier dew left a slick sheen on roofs and outdoor surfaces across the area. 19-year-old Nora Quinn was spending Halloween night alone at her family's two-story colonial home while her parents attended a neighborhood gathering. A college freshman studying communications, Nora was known by friends as cautious and responsible, often preferring quiet evenings to large social events. The house sat on a peaceful cul-de-sac lined with mature oak trees that partially blocked the streetlights, creating uneven visibility across the property. Her 22-year-old brother worked in retail management and had a reputation for elaborate pranks among his friend group. That evening, he convinced two co-workers to help execute what they considered a harmless Halloween scare. The brother later told investigators that he never imagined Nora would think the intrusion was real. Using his spare key to the family home, the three young men entered through the back door while Nora was upstairs in her bedroom. The group moved through the darkened house carrying flashlights, deliberately opening drawers and cabinets to simulate the sounds of intruders searching for valuables. They tapped on windows from the inside and created footsteps in the hallway. According to police statements given later, the brother expected Nora would quickly realize it was a prank. Upstairs, Nora heard the unfamiliar sounds and saw moving lights through her bedroom door. Genuinely believing burglars had entered the house, she immediately called emergency services and barricaded herself in her bedroom closet. The recorded call captured her whispered reports of intruders moving through the house, along with audible sounds of doors opening and muffled voices. As the sounds seemed to move closer to the stairway, Nora made the decision to escape through her second-story bedroom window. She climbed onto the composite shingle roof, which had become slippery from the evening's moisture accumulation. Evidence at the scene suggested she had attempted to reach a low-hanging oak branch, approximately 6 feet from the roof's edge. Police responding to her emergency call later documented wet sock prints near the windowsill and visible water beading on the roof surface. As Nora attempted to reach the tree branch, her right foot lost traction on the damp shingles. She slid toward the edge and fell approximately 18 feet, landing directly on the concrete driveway below. Patrol officers arrived roughly 4 minutes after the initial call and discovered Nora unconscious on the driveway. Dispatch logs showed a patrol unit was already passing through the neighborhood for Halloween safety checks, which shortened the response time. Inside the house, they found her brother and his friends removing their masks, having realized something had gone wrong when they heard sirens approaching. Paramedics pronounced Nora dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined that she had suffered a basilar skull fracture and severe brain trauma, consistent with a high-impact fall onto concrete from a significant height. The investigation included analysis of the emergency call recording, crime scene measurements, and police body cam footage that documented the wet roofing conditions and the open bedroom window. Her brother faced charges of reckless endangerment and involuntary manslaughter. The case highlighted the unpredictable consequences of pranks designed to frighten, particularly when the target believes they are facing genuine danger and responds with survival instincts. It was March 15, 2018, during spring break at a beach house rental in Gulf Shores, Alabama. 8 college students had gathered for their annual week-long vacation, with temperatures reaching a warm 78 degrees Fahrenheit under clear skies and moderate humidity levels. 23-year-old Ramona Davies was a pre-medical student known for her disciplined lifestyle and meticulous health habits. Friends described her as someone who maintained strict dietary routines and exercised daily, often declining junk food in favor of protein smoothies and morning runs along the beach. She had a tendency toward dehydration during physical activity. Medical notes from her campus clinic later confirmed she had previously shown borderline electrolyte levels after long workouts. Her roommate worked in campus food services and had developed a mischievous streak over their years of friendship. The roommate later admitted to investigators that she believed Ramona had become too rigid in her habits and decided to play what she considered a harmless prank by secretly adding nearly a full bottle of magnesium citrate solution to Ramona's morning protein smoothie. According to her statement to police, her intention was to cause embarrassing digestive issues during their planned beach volleyball activities. The morning began routinely with the group preparing for outdoor games on the sand. Ramona consumed her usual breakfast smoothie before joining the volleyball match, playing energetically for over an hour in the direct sunlight and coastal wind. The physical exertion caused significant sweating, which would later prove medically relevant. Within a few hours of consuming the adulterated drink, Ramona began experiencing severe abdominal cramping. This progressed to profuse diarrhea and repeated vomiting episodes as her body reacted to the large quantity of osmotic laxative. Initially, she attempted to rehydrate using plain water, but her condition continued deteriorating. By mid-afternoon, witnesses observed Ramona becoming increasingly disoriented and complaining of heart palpitations. Her friends, unaware of the prank, assumed she was experiencing normal digestive upset and did not seek medical attention. They later told police they assumed she had food poisoning from the previous night's takeout. The combination of the laxative effects, previous dehydration from exercise, and inability to retain fluids created a dangerous physiological situation. Emergency medical services were eventually called when Ramona collapsed in the beach house bathroom. Paramedics found her with rapid, irregular pulse patterns. Their cardiac monitoring equipment recorded ventricular tachycardia that quickly degenerated despite initial treatment attempts. During transport and emergency department care, medical staff initiated intravenous fluid replacement and advanced cardiac life support protocols. Laboratory tests revealed severe electrolyte imbalances, particularly low potassium levels, along with metabolic acidosis consistent with massive fluid loss. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, including multiple medications and electrical cardioversion, Ramona suffered cardiac arrest and could not be revived. The medical examiner concluded her death was consistent with severe dehydration and electrolyte collapse, triggered by the large dose of osmotic laxative. The investigation revealed the roommate's involvement when she admitted to adding magnesium citrate to the smoothie. Physical evidence included text messages and an empty laxative bottle found in the kitchen trash. Criminal charges were filed against the roommate for actions contributing to the death. The case demonstrated how seemingly minor pranks involving substances can have fatal consequences when combined with environmental factors. It was August 22, 2016, in Phoenix, Arizona, where afternoon temperatures reached 112 degrees Fahrenheit under relentless sun. Closed vehicles sitting in direct sunlight measured between 130 and 150 degrees inside, especially those with dark-colored trunk compartments that absorbed heat rapidly. 20-year-old Bastian Stone worked at an electronics retailer in a busy shopping mall and was known among co-workers for his playful nature and love of practical jokes. His colleagues often described him as someone who enjoyed surprising people with harmless scares. He also had a habit of checking his car trunk repeatedly, worried about potential break-ins. What his co-workers didn't know was that the trunk's internal release cable had recently begun sticking intermittently, something Bastian had noticed, but had not yet repaired. His co-worker, who managed inventory at the same store, decided to turn Bastian's trunk-checking habit into what he believed would be a harmless prank. He planned to hide inside the trunk and jump out when Bastian ended his shift, expecting the whole thing to last only 10 to 15 minutes. Previous playful jump scare pranks among the team had gone smoothly, which made him think this one would be just as harmless. During the afternoon shift change, while Bastian remained inside helping customers, the co-worker used Bastian's habit of leaving his car unlocked during work hours, a practice multiple employees later confirmed. With the vehicle accessible, He climbed into the trunk of Bastian's dark-colored sedan, parked in the employee section of the mall lot. The car had been sitting in full sun exposure for hours, and the trunk's temperature continued rising as the metal surfaces absorbed heat. Store records showed that a complicated customer issue extended Bastian's shift far longer than expected. Meanwhile, the trunk's interior reached dangerously high levels. As temperatures climbed, the co-worker attempted to adjust his position inside the confined space. Forensic inspectors later determined that this movement likely worsened the sticking release cable, making it difficult or impossible to activate from inside. After roughly 40 minutes in the superheated compartment, he began showing signs of severe heat exhaustion. Rising heat overwhelmed his body's ability to regulate temperature. Early confusion, dizziness, and dehydration set in quickly, impairing his ability to recognize or use the emergency handle. By the time Bastian finally walked to his car and opened the trunk, the co-worker was semi-conscious, with hot, dry skin and shallow, rapid breathing. Witnesses saw Bastian immediately call for help and attempt to cool him. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes. Paramedics recorded a core body temperature above 105 degrees Fahrenheit and began aggressive cooling procedures. Despite rapid transport, ice pack cooling, and advanced life support efforts at the hospital, the prolonged exposure had already caused irreversible damage to multiple organ systems. He was pronounced dead less than an hour after being found. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as heat stroke resulting from confinement in an overheated vehicle compartment. Vehicle forensics confirmed that the trunk's release cable showed signs of intermittent mechanical sticking, consistent with a partial jam. Investigators concluded that the co-worker likely attempted to escape, but could not activate the compromised mechanism, with heat-induced confusion further limiting his ability to respond. The incident underscored how quickly enclosed vehicle spaces can become lethal during extreme heat, and how even simple pranks can turn fatal when mechanical failures and environmental conditions intersect. It was April 12, 2015, at a downtown office building in Seattle, Washington. The overcast morning brought temperatures of 52 degrees Fahrenheit with light rain. The 15-story structure housed multiple businesses and maintained strict security protocols. 26-year-old Annika Lowe worked as a marketing coordinator on the 8th floor and had been employed there for nearly 3 years. Medical records later revealed she had a documented history of panic disorder and took daily medication that could affect heart rhythm. Colleagues described her as diligent and detail-oriented, though she sometimes appeared anxious during stressful situations. Her co-worker in the same department had grown frustrated with monotonous office life and decided to create excitement through an elaborate prank. According to his confession to federal investigators, he believed calling in a fake bomb threat would result in a routine building evacuation, giving everyone an unexpected day off. His plan involved using an anonymous internet calling service. Investigators later described him as socially naive, with no real understanding of how seriously bomb threats are treated. During the mid-morning hours, building security received the threatening call claiming a bomb had been placed on the 8th floor with a 20-minute detonation timer. Emergency protocols were immediately activated throughout the facility. Security personnel began floor-by-floor evacuations, directing all occupants to use stairwells exclusively, while elevators were automatically disabled. Floor wardens quickly organized the evacuation process, guiding employees toward the emergency stairwells. The narrow staircases became crowded as hundreds of people from multiple floors began descending simultaneously. Witnesses later reported that Annika appeared visibly distressed upon hearing the bomb threat announcement. As Annika began descending the packed stairwell, several people noticed she was breathing heavily and had become noticeably pale. The combination of the emergency situation, crowded conditions, and her underlying anxiety disorder created physiological stress. Her heart rate likely increased dramatically in response to the perceived life-threatening situation. On the 5th floor landing, Annika suddenly collapsed among the crowd of evacuating employees. A fellow tenant who witnessed the collapse immediately retrieved an automated external defibrillator from a nearby emergency station. The AED detected an unstable rhythm and advised a shock. Hospital records later confirmed it was torsade de pointes. 2 electrical shocks were delivered by the AED, while other evacuees performed chest compressions. The evacuation continued around the medical emergency, as building protocol required clearing all floors before emergency responders could safely enter. First responders reached Annika after the affected floor was completely cleared, causing a brief but critical delay in advanced medical care. Despite continued resuscitation efforts and transport to the hospital, she could not be revived. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as sudden cardiac arrest resulting from a stress-induced malignant heart rhythm. Her anxiety medication could prolong electrical conduction in the heart, making her vulnerable to dangerous arrhythmias during extreme stress. The investigation traced the anonymous call through internet service records back to her co-worker, who faced federal charges for making false bomb threats resulting in death. The case demonstrated how pranks designed to create panic can have fatal consequences for individuals with underlying medical vulnerabilities. It was June 3, 2019, at a construction site in Denver, Colorado. The clear evening maintained comfortable temperatures around 71 degrees Fahrenheit, with excellent visibility as daylight gradually faded. The active apartment construction project featured a 12-foot deep utility excavation surrounded by standard orange safety fencing. 31-year-old Tobias Fox served as a site supervisor and was known throughout the construction industry for his meticulous attention to safety protocols. Co-workers respected his thoroughness during daily inspections and his insistence on proper protective equipment usage. He had developed a reputation for catching safety violations that others might overlook. The project foreman, who had worked under Tobias for several months, had grown tired of what he perceived as excessive safety scrutiny. He decided to play what he considered a harmless practical joke by temporarily removing a 6-foot section of protective fencing around the excavation. According to his statement to investigators, his intention was to watch Tobias discover the apparent safety violation during his routine walkthrough. Workers had temporarily removed several safety caps earlier for alignment work and had not yet replaced them. Co-workers later told investigators that the foreman frequently joked about Tobias's strictness and underestimated the danger. As evening approached, Tobias began his customary final inspection of the construction site. This daily routine involved systematically checking various work areas, scaffolding connections, and safety installations before securing the site for the night. He carried a standard flashlight to examine areas where natural lighting had become insufficient. The excavation area had been properly marked and fenced throughout the day with barriers, warning signs, and reflective tape. However, the removed fencing section created an unmarked gap in the safety perimeter that was not immediately visible in the diminishing light conditions. While examining overhead scaffolding work near the excavation, Tobias focused his attention upward and began walking backward to get a better viewing angle of the structural connections. The foreman, positioned approximately 30 feet away, witnessed Tobias approaching the unprotected opening, but realized too late that his co-worker was unaware of the missing barrier. Tobias stepped directly into the gap and fell the full 12 feet into the excavation. The bottom of the trench contained exposed steel reinforcement bars and concrete debris from ongoing utility installation work. Workers had temporarily removed several safety caps earlier for alignment work and had not yet replaced them. During his fall, he struck multiple pieces of uncapped rebar that had been left protruding from the excavation walls. The foreman immediately called emergency services and climbed down into the trench to provide assistance. He found Tobias conscious but severely injured, with obvious signs of internal trauma from the steel reinforcement bars. Emergency responders arrived and required specialized equipment to safely extract him from the confined space. During transport to the hospital, medical personnel noted signs of internal bleeding and initiated trauma protocols. Despite surgical intervention and blood transfusion efforts, Tobias succumbed to his injuries from multiple penetrating wounds that had damaged vital organs. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as hemorrhagic shock resulting from internal bleeding caused by penetrating trauma from steel reinforcement materials. The investigation documented the missing safety fencing through scene photographs and witness statements from the foreman, who admitted to removing the barriers. Criminal charges were filed against the foreman for reckless endangerment resulting in death. It was September 7th, 2017, in Chicago, Illinois, where steady rain fell throughout the evening as temperatures held at 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The third-floor apartment overlooked a busy street where regular traffic noise provided constant background sound. 24-year-old Una Bell worked as a graphic designer and had been living with her boyfriend for 3 years in what friends described as a stable relationship. Medical records would later reveal she had been managing depression and anxiety with prescribed medication, though recent dosage adjustments had been made. Colleagues knew her as creative and sensitive, someone who took personal relationships seriously. Investigation revealed that her closest friend had grown concerned about what she perceived as complacency in Una's relationship. According to the friend's statement to police, she believed that some manufactured drama might reinvigorate the couple's connection and devised a scheme to create fake evidence of infidelity. Phone records also showed she had been drinking earlier, which may have impaired her judgment. During the early evening hours, the friend sent carefully constructed digital evidence to Una's phone, including manipulated screenshots of supposed conversations between her boyfriend and an unknown woman. She had also prepared a photograph of his car parked at a hotel, though this image had actually been taken weeks earlier during an unrelated business trip. Phone metadata later recovered by investigators showed that Una repeatedly viewed and forwarded these materials to another friend, accompanied by increasingly distressed text messages expressing shock and betrayal. The digital evidence appeared convincing enough to trigger genuine emotional distress in someone already vulnerable due to her mental health condition. Over approximately 45 minutes, Una's emotional state deteriorated rapidly as she processed what she believed was proof of her boyfriend's unfaithfulness. During this period, she made several phone calls to her boyfriend, though he was unable to immediately explain the fabricated evidence since he was unaware of its false nature. As her distress intensified, Una consumed a significant quantity of her prescribed benzodiazepine medication along with alcohol. The combination of these substances, particularly in someone already taking psychiatric medications, created a dangerous situation involving central nervous system depression. Toxicology experts noted that her recent medication adjustment made her more vulnerable to unpredictable reactions. Her boyfriend, concerned by her increasingly incoherent phone calls, drove immediately to the apartment. Upon arriving, he discovered Una unresponsive on the living room floor, with shallow, irregular breathing patterns consistent with respiratory depression from the drug and alcohol combination. Emergency medical services responded within minutes of his call for help. Paramedics documented severely depressed respiratory function and probable aspiration of stomach contents. Sedation from the drug-alcohol combination likely suppressed her gag reflex, increasing the risk of inhaling stomach contents. Standard reversal agents were considered but not administered due to the risk of seizures in mixed substance ingestions. Despite aggressive airway management and supportive care during transport and at the hospital, Una's condition continued to deteriorate. She progressed to complete respiratory failure and was pronounced dead after resuscitation efforts proved unsuccessful. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as acute combined benzodiazepine and alcohol toxicity with aspiration complications. The subsequent investigation revealed the fabricated nature of the infidelity evidence through phone data analysis. The friend who created the false materials faced criminal charges related to actions that contributed to the death. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.